welcome to another episode of the BPB podcast. Today, we have a very special guest with us, Sunil Godse. Sunil is the founder and CEO of intuitiology, and I'm so excited to chat with him today. We're going to be learning a lot. You know, after making a series of bad decisions, one with actually leading to a friend being shot and killed, Sunil spent thousands of hours on research and interviews to find out that the reason we were wasting so much time in making bad decisions is because we ignore our intuition, a subconscious phenomenon that we were all born with that actually helps us make the right decisions at the right time in any situation we find ourselves in. Sunil developed a 7-step process that shows you how to sharpen your intuition so that the only decisions you make are the right ones in any situation, and it allows you to move forward with your life. So Sunil, welcome. Thanks for being here today.
Thank you very much. Thanks for the invitation. I'm happy to educate your listeners on intuition and get them some advice on what they can do right away to start sharpening their intuitive skills.
Excellent. Even before we started recording, Rory and I were talking about just how we, as entrepreneurs and business owners, we really heavily rely on our intuition to make decisions. I mean, in every aspect of our lives. And so I'm excited to learn more about the scientific aspect of it.
Absolutely.
As Dominica said, you really had this transition where one of your friends was shot, and it was because you didn't use your intuition. How did you really get into studying intuition? Was it because of that, or is something else happen, or what did that look like? What was the story of what led you to discovering all of this great information about intuition?
Yeah, absolutely. And so the way that it really kind of started is it really cascaded in a good way after I wrote my first book called Fail Fast, Succeed Faster. And the premise about that book was, if you learned from the failures and hurdles of other entrepreneurs and business executives, then as long as you don't repeat them, you should be able to succeed faster. And so I interviewed over 300 people, and 75 stories made it into the book. And then when I used to start speaking on stages around the world, the one question that I kept getting from entrepreneurs was, okay, what's the one thing I can do that's going to make me successful? And at that time, I kind of rolled my eyes and saying, well, okay, I've done all these interviews, and there's so much variety in what can go on that I don't think there is one thing, until I went back to the audio recordings. And when I went back to the audio recordings, 80 to 90% of them use some form of, I should have trusted my intuition. I should have trusted my gut. I knew what decision was that I didn't do it. Some form of that. And that really got me going, thinking, okay, now what is this thing called intuition? Mm-hmm. And so, okay, so I know that I've experienced it. So let me reflect back to when I did. And the very first time that I remember intuition hitting me was when I was 5 years old. And I had these video games that I wanted to buy. There was the very first video games that first came out, and they were expensive. And my dad said, there's no way that you can have them. But I distinctly remember this voice telling me to go door to door to raise money. And that's exactly what I did. I went door to door. I raised $200. $100 went to my dad, and the other $100 went to charity, which is what my school did. I felt really good about that. So that was my very, very first brush with intuition now that I look back. But then this is when I started reflecting on the times when I ignored my intuition. And 3 things came up automatically. The first was, now for those watching, I'm a South Asian and firstborn son. So what that means is you have to drink the East Indian Kool-Aid. And there are 4 things when it comes to a career. It's doctor, lawyer, engineer, or failure. And so I decided to take door number 3, which was engineer, even though my intuition was telling me that I wanted to go into entrepreneurship. So, I listened to my dad, got into engineering, and I hated it. And it was 3 years taken away from me when I could be taking 3 years doing entrepreneurship. In the second of that 3-year stint, I got a chance to become an investor with a Mexican restaurant chain out of Mexico and bring it up to Canada. And pretty soon I found myself making 5 times more as an investor than I was as a full-time engineer. And so my intuition was just getting louder and louder, saying, Sunil, you got to stop. And so at the 3-year mark, I ended up quitting engineering. I sacrificed my relationship with my dad. We didn't talk for several years after that. But I went into entrepreneurship, and 5 or 6 ventures later, I amassed about 20 million in revenues before becoming a consultant. When I became a consultant, I remember there was this amazing lucrative contract. This is a Canadian person here looking at a big contract in Silicon Valley, big dollars, big IT firm. And I'm thinking, wow, this is amazing. I've hit the jackpot. But the contract terms kept changing. And so I remember this something telling me that I needed to back off, but I was so emotionally invested in this contract and talking about it and how it would make me look and feel to others that I went down there and spent every single penny, and the company never paid me. And I came back to Canada with 25 cents in my bank account, about to be married in a couple of years. My wife, thankfully, was overseas, phoning me to say, hey, how are things going? And I'm thinking, excellent, not too bad. I'm just going to, come back to Canada and, pick up things. And here I'm driving, and I didn't even know where I was going to sleep that night.
Wow.
So that also hit. And then perhaps the most devastating one, which you introduced me to, was when I had a friend of mine reach out to me. And when I was going through engineering, I was doing some personal coaching at the time, and she needed some help because she was being stalked. And my intuition was saying, meet with her that afternoon. I didn't have anything going on yet. For some really dumb reason, I said, let's meet a couple of days later. The very next day, that same guy walked up to her, followed her to a bus shelter, and shot her in the head and killed her. That is something that I absolutely could have prevented had I given her the right information. So this really got me thinking, why? Like I knew what the right decision was. And what were these some things that were telling me what the right decision was? And they were all different. And so I had all these questions swirling in my head about what was going on. And what I ended up finding out was that, okay, there's sort of the art and science to intuition. The art part were sort of these feelings that I got, but there's also, like, I come from, obviously I've been an engineer, so there's got to be some kind of scientific basis. I'm thinking that intuition's kind of, backed by. And so the research that I did at that time, now we're talking about 2013-ish, everything when people were talking about intuition, it was more about sort of spiritual, it's a spiritual entity coming from the cosmos, meditation, manifestation, and that's okay. So if people think that that's what intuition is, that's absolutely fine, because what I ended up finding out is intuition is very personal. And so when I started digging into the academic literature, boom, tens of thousands of articles. I had MRIs, brain scans. I had the premise that we were born with intuition, because if you think all your neurons are soaking up all these experiences around you and parking them in the subconscious area of your brain. So I found some research that shows that infants as young as 2 months old have shown to have intuitive capabilities. So all this research is backing up what I'm thinking about what intuition is. And I found out that there's kind of 4 groups of people that came to when I was thinking about, okay, how do other people perceive intuition? The first are ones that absolutely get it. They know it. They live their life with it. They know they've got these things called intuitive signals. They listen to it, and that's their whole life. And I found there was an intuitive psychic that she runs her life on that. A Buddhist monk that I interviewed for my podcast series, obviously relies on intuition all the time for his decisions. So that was the first group. The second group are ones that kind of get the feeling, but they need proof. And so that was exactly what happened with the gut. I mean, that's the whole reason why I had a lot of the brain scans in my book, as well as a lot of the research pieces in there. So that gives them the proof that validates the signals that they have. The third group of people were ones that kind of talk about it. So they talk about manifestation, being positive, authenticity, intuition, but they really don't live it. And I had a friend of mine who actually we met through us having this. I talk about intuition. He talks more about positivity and intuition to a certain degree. And that attracted us as colleagues. And then he saw me speak. And what I started talking about, the 4 types of intuition that we'll talk about and the intuitive signals, it really crystallized for him what really intuition was and how it drove his decisions. Where previous to hearing me speak, it was just more of an entity for him. It was a way of kind of driving decisions without him really kind of knowing. And for him, the pinnacle moment for him was when he actually contracted COVID-19. He ended up in a New York hospital and unable to breathe. And it came to a life or death moment. And his name's Hal Eisenberg. Hal actually wanted to die, but his intuition pulled him out and said, no, you've got a lot more work to do. And it became crystal clear to him about how his decisions were to be made. And to give you an example, he used to, advise his team that he had, we should do this, but sometimes he didn't feel right. He'd talk about intuition, but absolutely, I mean, intuition now, if you made a decision, it was clear. It was like an open field. That's what you followed. And 5 days later, he came out of the hospital. I was the first person he told extensively about the story. And he was my very first podcast guest for my Intuitionology podcast series. And what a way to kickstart a podcast series from someone who almost died and really understands what intuition is. And the fourth group of people were ones that just don't believe. It doesn't exist. And one of my colleagues, actually, this was a really, really interesting, it was almost probably the one that validated the Intuitionology project. He was one of my first interviewees, and this was the former CEO and chairman of Kara Operations Limited. So this guy was an investment banker, and just, he didn't understand all this spiritual talk about intuition. It just never occurs to him. And that for him it just doesn't exist. So I remember turning the cameras on, and he's just saying, I don't know what we're going to talk about. We'll talk about intuition for 5 minutes and maybe catch up for the next 55 with a cappuccino, haven't seen you in a while. So the cameras are on, and you can hear him say on the camera, he's saying, yeah, you know what? I don't see omens and, these things. I wish I'd shake the hand that has. I just don't get these feelings. And, decisions, I don't really think intuition plays into these decisions. And then as I'm moving him along, one of the four types of intuition is called experiential intuition. And it actually acts on your past experience learning data to inform your decisions. So I'm educating him about the four types of intuition as he's telling stories. And halfway through, I tell him sometimes you can make a decision that goes against the data. And so he perks up and goes, yeah, I got a story for you. And so he tells me of a story when he opened franchise locations. And if it was a 9 out of 10, then they would open it up. There was a location that was a 5.5 out of 10. And he was saying, my intuition, I'm not sure if it was intuition, but something about me and my partner were saying, we need to open something up there. And that ended up being one of the most profitable franchise brands under his restaurant portfolio, which was called the Beer Market. And so we keep moving on and on about intuition. And at about the hour mark, we're almost done the interview. Now he's fully into intuition. He fully understands what it is. You can tell by his body language, he's using the word intuition. And the very last question I ask him is, okay, John, when did you make a decision that was so obtuse that people thought you were nuts? And that's the second type of the four, called creative intuition. And so he says, oh, I got a really good one for you. This is a guy as an investment banking making $3 to $4 million a year, private jets, high-end restaurants, limousines. And he wanted to trade that all off to run a tiny, bankrupt little restaurant. Now, I'm sure that a lot of his colleagues had speed dial psychiatrist numbers saying, okay, John, I'm going to set some appointments up for you. You really need to see Dr. So-and-so. But he did. He quit. And he walked into that tiny bankrupt little restaurant. That restaurant happened to be Eastside Mario's location number 1. And that ended up being over 1,000 locations in 20 years, $2 billion under different brand names and acquisitions by the time he retired, all because of an intuitive decision. And so I was saying to myself, if I can take someone from zero to hero in 1 hour, can you imagine what I can do for others? And that's really kind of how the Intuitionology project started. And over 1,000 people later, with interviews, stories of people's lives transforming because of their own intuition and understanding how it really behaves. It's transformed the way they make decisions, so that they stop wasting time making bad decisions, because your intuition is always telling you what the right decision is.
It's such interesting and great information you're sharing.
Thank you.
So what I want to ask is, you've developed this intuitionology process.
Yep.
Could you speak a little bit more to that? How it might come into play when someone is making business decisions, for example?
Absolutely. So the one thing with this, and let's back up with some statistics as well. So part of the research, when they looked at when it came to even entrepreneurs, what they did is they measured things like heart rate and skin conductance. And what they found was that at that time, and we're going way back, they found that intuition acted on average 7 to 10 seconds before an entrepreneur actually took an action or made a decision. And research that's coming out now that is about to be published, I've been told by a colleague, because of the research methodologies that are a little bit more accurate, that's as early as 23 seconds before we make a decision. And we have people like Jeff Bezos and Tim Cook and Sarah Blakely and Richard Branson, Oprah, and of course, Steve Jobs, all talking about how intuition drives their decisions. And I have a video actually on the intuitiology.com website showing snippets of them. Even the Harry Potter series just came down to J.K. Rowling, all based on intuition. So from a business context, what happens is you have a problem. And this is what the 7-step process does. And there's actually a 7-day challenge. So if somebody gets the ebook off my website, they directly go to a 7-day challenge, which showcases the 7 steps. Because the whole point of what I'm trying to do is to show you, okay, it's great that you know what intuition is, but it doesn't help if I can't help you apply it. You don't even have to do anything else with me. Here's a template I'm going to give you. Here's how you apply intuition. Take that template for every decision that you have. So if we take a look at a business decision, let's assume we have any kind of problem, a business problem that we're trying to wrestle with. One of the first things that you do is you take a look at the past to see, okay, what didn't work in the past, right? And you list those. And what you need to do is think about what you feel in that moment. And what that is a negative. So you also have things called intuitive signals. And so when these 4 types of intuition come together to help you with a decision, it communicates with you through these things called intuitive signals, and they're positive and negative. So by you looking at the past business decisions that you've made that didn't work, what you're now researching are what are those negative signals that were telling you that you shouldn't have made that decision, but you actually plowed through them anyways. And so what happened is you actually ignored a negative intuitive signal. So the first step is to really kind of take a look at, okay, let's take a look at our negative signals. Then the next thing you do is let's take a look at our positive signals. But how do we do that? So I get people to really take a step back and think about where they're going to go. So from a business context, maybe you just shut the door and think. Maybe you go play squash and racquetball and think about what's going on, from a strategy perspective. Perhaps you walk. Some people in the shower or when I'm driving. These are areas that I get really good strategic decisions or marketing decisions for intuitionology, and those are called intuitive mediums. When you place yourself in those things called intuitive mediums, you really kind of cut out the noise. All the bombardment of the noise around you, social media, people just yammering at you. It's just a calm place that you go and you think clearly. And every one of us has one of these intuitive mediums that you get into. And so that's when you start thinking about, okay, what should I be doing? And when you think about what you should be doing, then you start getting into the positive intuitive signals. And these should feel like the dots connecting or a pull or a flow. And more importantly, if you think about something that you should be doing from a business perspective, and now you can get a negative signal coming in because you know what they are, now you know that's not the right decision, and you need to discard that from the list. And so now you've got a basket of negative signals, you have a basket of positive signals, and the next thing is to plan, okay, what are the steps that you need to do to fix that problem? Once you have that, and again, you're thinking about, okay, well, how does it feel? Then you take action. And so in that 7-day challenge or in that 7-step process, particularly with the challenge, I actually measure your intuition before and measure your intuition after using a proprietary system with some questions. And I've had over 54,000 people now through that challenge. And 100% of the time in those 7 days, their intuition has become stronger. And it's up to them now to continue with that template for every decision they make, whether it's in business or in their personal life.
For me, it's the shower. That's where, things come into clarity and those intuitive moments happen. Intuitiveness can come down to you're making a meal, okay, for example, and you're about to use a certain type of ingredient. And then suddenly you say, you know what? I have this intuition that I shouldn't be using this. You don't know why, right? Maybe you just picked it up and then something just didn't feel right. And you have the choice of either following that intuition and going that path or ignoring it.
Yeah.
And I found that 2 things. The first is that when I ignore it, like you said, bad things can happen. Maybe you get food poisoning or something like that in a case like that. But when I actually follow it, I have to just make the decision to follow it and not look back, not wonder if it was the right decision. It's just move forward with that and don't worry about it because it was an intuitive moment.
Yes, yeah, absolutely. And one of the things that you have to think about is and this is where you're really in touch with your signals. You have to make sure that you're following those and not falling prey to, because someone else said that this is a good ingredient. You just got off the phone with someone. And so now you're emotionally driven. And so one of the 4 intuitive hurdles is being overly emotional. When you're being overly emotional, you're actually not going down, you're not trusting your intuition. You're actually falling prey to a hurdle. And so you have to be very, very careful. And this is where you need to know your signals. And a really good example of this is I had Mark Metry on my podcast series, and he has the Humans 2.0 podcast, it's top 100 on Apple iTunes. And so he talks a lot about social anxiety. Mm-hmm. And on my podcast, he starts talking about how in high school, he had to lie again and again and again, and he almost wanted to take his own life. Mm-hmm. And so he started saying sometimes intuition doesn't put you through some great experiences. And so what I said, but okay, hold on, Mark. If we were to review the podcast, and of course I did this after we were done, one of the very first things he says before he lies is, I knew I shouldn't have. Mm-hmm. Now, the moment, even when he's telling the story that he said, I knew I shouldn't have, that's your intuition saying, you're telling me now you shouldn't have lied. And so he ignored the first intuition and he continued to go down the slippery slope. And that's a second intuitive hurdle called ego, trying to fit in, even though it goes against your values. And he needed to lie again to try and fit in and get deeper and deeper into that hole until there was no way up for him, or so he thought. And he almost took his own life because of that. And that's the thing with intuition is, even though you're at rock bottom, you can still, intuition's always shining a light. You just have to look up. And so all your experiences, both good and bad, all figure into intuition. So just because, today you've had, you made some good decisions and bad decisions, and you're thinking, oh, I should have trusted my intuition. Well, start today, because there's always opportunity. There's always positive. You always make the right decisions, no matter where you are in life. Right. And the people I've interviewed have been, Sarah Prout's she left an abusive marriage, 40 instances of physical abuse in a 10-year marriage. She left because of an intuitive moment. She stayed because she was too emotional. Here she leaves 2 kids in tow, $30K in debt, on welfare, homeless, eating bread and beans, picking up furniture on the side of the roads, putting pieces of soap together so that her kids can have a shower from public washrooms and bring it home. 6 years later, she finds the love of her life, and she's now running a $1 million operation on manifestation. Right now, so I'm not saying that everybody's going to be a millionaire. That's not the message at all. The message is she had a choice of what she wanted to do with that abusive relationship. And it was December 31st. She looked at the stars. She got that intuitive signal. Now's the time. And she did. And the steps that she took opened up another door, and yet another door. Even though she's on the streets, she had that, you can call it hope or what have you, but she trusted those intuitive signals just to keep going. And 6 years later, she's doing very well.
That's incredible. And yay for her. Oh my goodness. That is an intense story. I'm glad it turned out well. Oh my gosh.
Yes, absolutely.
What would you say to someone who may have an issue with discerning the difference between anxiety and intuition? Oftentimes when I'm in meetings with my clients, they'll say, I was just really anxious about it and I wasn't too sure what to do. Like, well, but I feel like they would have known what to do if they had the proper tools at that time. So have you seen that working with your clients or with your students, looking for those different markers?
Absolutely. So being really anxious is really a heightened emotional state. And that's great if you're excited, but are you excited for the right things? Mm-hmm. And so this is now where we talked about getting into that intuitive medium. So I can be excited about a marketing opportunity, or I get excited about what someone says on a podcast, about digital marketing or some operations or a new software or what have you. Mm-hmm. And I'll get very excited in the moment. I often need 24 hours to distill that, to say, okay, what is that excitement for? Can I connect the dots to say, okay, let's assume it's a digital marketing play, and it's Facebook ads and how to do Facebook ads properly. So I'll take a look at that and say, okay, I understand this technique that this person is talking about, and exciting. And so that, when you get excited, you want to follow that person, you're going to maybe sign up for the program, and et cetera, et cetera. But I take a step back and say, okay, how am I going to fit that in the operations? What does this have to do with my team? What happens because they're already trained in some Facebook ads? Am I going to derail what they're doing? Am I going to go off the deep end? And yet another idea, how is this really going to really hit me from a business perspective? How is it going to impact long-term? What about all the other ads that we're doing? How does it affect the budget? So all of these things are what I'm thinking about. And that typically, if it's a major decision, I need 24 hours to get into my intuitive medium, which is, we talked about the shower, Rory. That's one before I go to bed. And I always wake up at about 2:30 or 3 every morning without fail, and start putting stuff in my phone, because that's when I'm thinking about these kind of things. And in fact, this happened again last night. There was another one, and I was on the phone with my team this morning at 9 because I had a dump of stuff that I was thinking about in terms of the direction of what we're trying to do. So these are the things that you really need to take that excitement. And so it could be good excitement, or it could be an emotional one. You need to really temper that with, okay, what's the thing? And what are the intuitive signals? For me, the dots are connecting. It's a flow. I can see it. The short and long-term vision makes sense as to what I described with the team. If it is something that I need, it's a 90-degree angle, because we need to take something that goes against the data. We need to change. Is that change congruent with my brand? Is it congruent with what my purpose is? Is it really going to accelerate what I really want to do? All of these things are questions that I'm asking internally. I may write them out. I may talk to other people, or I may just sit with these thoughts and just listen to those signals. That's how you temper that excitement, to make sure that it really is your intuition that's leading you to make that decision, because now you're balancing the emotions with a sense of logic. Your head and heart are balanced. And when those two things are balanced, now you have a really good decision you're making, because the emotions are tempered and you can rationally work it out. One's not tipping the scale compared to the other.
Fantastic tools. I'm really excited to go check out your assessment on your website. Is that what it is?
Yeah, the 7-day challenge. Yeah, and there's actually 2 people that go through it as case studies every single day. And so you get what they did with the decisions they made for those days. And the first one is John Harris, who's actually took the 7 days to sell his house. So on day 1, well, before day 1, day 0, he was almost bending to sell his house at a $20,000 loss, because he had an aggressive real estate professional, and his intuition saying something's wrong about her. By the time he reached the 7 days, there was a bidding war, and he sold for $50,000 over asking price. So that 7-day challenge was a $70,000 decision. And the second person is actually Michelle. She was actually witness to a homicide. She walked into an apartment where her boyfriend had just murdered one of their friends. He locked the door behind her, put a knife to her back, and said, "You're next." And her intuition calmed her down. Then she was assaulted. She was choked. She was asked to clean the blood, which she refused. And intuition just found the moment where she could escape. She unlocked the doors, ran 18 flights of stairs down from the apartment building, called 911. And obviously she's lived to tell the story, but she suffered a lot with PTSD, depression, and anxiety. She used the 7 days to minimize that. It didn't help. It's not going to eradicate that. There's a lot more work that needs to be done. But what she did use is that 7 days to figure out, okay, if she goes back to the gym, she found that intuitive medium we were talking about that really gets her just to really flesh out those emotions. And it also helped her start to trust people again, because she just really did not trust people. And so she still suffers from that stuff. And I'm in constant contact with, in fact, she just texted me just before this podcast interview. So we're in touch a lot, just because now she's just found, like, this is just, it's so important. And she's just such an advocate for her, for the 7-day challenge. So what I tell people is if you have somebody like Ashley and John go through this and find wins, can you imagine what you do for a problem that you have, that you're trying to solve? And then once you have that template, take it for the next problem and the next problem and the next problem. And if you want to dive deeper, happy to do that. I've got, obviously, there's a membership program I've got intensives that I'm going to be doing. There's 4-week intensives where I actually get rid of the hurdles permanently for everyone, but they don't necessarily need that. If they want to just take the 7 days and use those components, good on you, and go nuts. And I'm hoping to see the success, and hopefully people will get back to me and tell me about the success that they've had with the 7-day challenge. And I've got, I think, 16 testimonials on how their lives have changed because of the project on my website, from all different backgrounds, businesses and personal lives. So the stuff works. The advice really, really works.
Yeah, that's great. One of the things I'm wondering is, have you ever worked with someone who wasn't able to tap into their intuition, or who had just flat out refused to trust it?
There have been some skeptics, but again, just like John, the thing is, intuition is very personal to them. So when I come across these people that don't believe, or they're not sure, what have you, it's their intuition, it's their stories, it's their signals. So all I'm doing is I'm shining a light on experiences that they already have. It's the way that they process intuition. It has nothing to do with me. I have a process that heightens it and explodes it, so that they're really kind of shining a light on their intuition. And ultimately, it's their decisions that they've had. So I haven't really had anybody I've met that I go away with saying, no, I don't. And John Rothschild was probably the best example. I mean, this guy was deep in data and experience, absolutely deep in data and experience. And so I pulled him through in an hour. There are times when you actually fall off the quote unquote wagon. I had one he was actually a boxer, and I had him as an interviewee, and he actually lost 3 of his professional boxing matches because he ignored his intuition. And the first person he told on camera publicly, he never told anybody else. And I'm thankful for that. So he joined my membership program, and he was doing well. And then he decided to leave. And then I remember walking into Costco with my wife doing some shopping, and I got a text from him. And basically without the expletives, he said, I just lost $2,000 in a scam. And I knew it, Sunil. I knew it. My intuition was saying, I knew it. I don't know why I left. And I said, well, Phil, you could always, get back to trusting your intuition. Like, this is stuff you should know. And so that's what happens again. So you got to be careful that you don't fall back to the old ways. In this case, it was $2,000 for him in a bad, shady real estate deal. So, that stuff can happen. And that's why it's a journey. You have to be vigilant about trusting your intuition. And there are going to be people that may not like the decisions that you're making. They may not like the direction you're going into. Who cares? Because in the 7-day challenge, a couple of the other things that I look at is filtering the people out to make sure that you only get the people that are going to solve that problem that you introduce. So now, even though you have your best friend, maybe your best friend isn't the one in that challenge to solve the problem that you have. Maybe it is a far off mentor or someone in your LinkedIn circle, whatever the case is, or maybe it's an employee. But to solve that problem, you got to figure out who are the people that are going to solve that problem for you. Then in life, you take that to even a bigger one. How do you use your intuition as a filtration mechanism to get people out of your life so that the only ones that surround you are people that are going to move your life forward? And these aren't yes people. These are people that are going to give you the constructive criticism, but they're going to be there for your ups and the downs and the peaks and the valleys of life, but they've got your back, and you know that intuitively. And so, and you have to also put yourself in the right environment. Again, the 7-day challenge gets you to what environment do you need to change to solve that problem? In life, what do you need to change? So this is where you have to be really, really careful about who you surround yourself in, and change your life, and only bring those people who are going to take you in the direction that your intuition knows that you should go into. And one of the things I often say is that we all have our own train that we're on. Mine's on a speeding bullet train because I know intuitively where I want to go. If you don't agree with it, you know what? Get off at the next station. And if you really become bothersome, I'm going to kick you off right now, because don't slow me down. Don't slow me down in the path that I have where my intuition is telling me to go. And so that's how you use intuition. So it's a constant journey. You may learn some new signals, right? You may look to others that share their signals and say, wow, I didn't think about that. And the other thing you also have to keep in mind is that you have to be careful that when you're looking at a problem, we all have this common signal called a gut feeling or a voice. And that seems to be common when intuition is being discussed. So let's say it's a voice. How do you know that voice is the first signal or the third signal, right? Because your intuition starts as a whisper. That's what Oprah calls it. It's always very subtle. And as you continue to ignore it, it gets louder, and it changes until it's kind of tapping on the shoulder saying, hello, your intuition is saying, listen to me. And some people equate this to being hit by a car, becoming bankrupt, being homeless, which is the ultimate signal before they start trusting their intuition. But if that voice is signal number 1, you're good, because that's the first signal. If that voice is signal number 3, what that tells me is that you haven't you dug deeper enough and done the work, because you've just haven't identified the first 2 signals, which means that you made 2 bad decisions. Now, those 2 bad decisions could be that you just simply, walked into a door, but the other 2 bad decisions could be that you're headed towards bankruptcy with your business. You don't know until you dig and find out what the first 2 signals are. And that's why you continually have to work at finding out, what are my subtle signals? What are the louder ones? Because now you can start backtracking, say, ooh, okay, I felt this before, and this is what happened in my past. I'm going to avoid that decision because I know what's happened. I'm going to take this one because that's what my intuition is telling me to do.
Well, yeah, and you take a situation and you zoom out. You don't always know what is the potential of something happen that didn't happen, right?
Mm-hmm.
We're always looking for that situation where we're the direct feedback. Oh, we did this, A happens
Mm-hmm.
and results in B. But sometimes we just have intuition to take a left while we're driving instead of go the route we normally go.
Yep.
We don't know that because we went left, nothing happened, right? We didn't, we didn't get in a car accident, but maybe if we had gone straight, we would have.
You're absolutely right. And this is where you don't want to question the question, right? You're absolutely right, right? Okay, maybe nothing might have happened, but are you going to take the wrong decision and figure out that nothing happened? It's like you're rolling a dice, right? Like, phew, nothing happened. Oh yeah, okay. No, well, this whole trusting the intuition thing is bogus. That's not right. You just don't ever want to question that. And this is where it's important that you don't hang your hat on goals or extrinsic motivations. You actually have to live in the present moment. You actually have to take the steps forward, and you'll reach those goals as long as you have a passion that's matched with a purpose. That purpose will drive you forward, but it's actually taking those steps. And there's going to be things like fear. Fear is another intuitive hurdle. The fear of change, fear of the unknown, fear of failure. But what you do is, even though you're fearful because maybe it's a new direction, you know that there's a positive intuitive signal there. So you know that your intuition is saying you should move that way. You're just holding yourself back because it's a direction you've never gone through. And a really good example of this is I had a colleague of mine. He had cerebral palsy and he's in a wheelchair for most of his life. His dream was to actually dip his toe in the ocean. And so he got a chance to do that. And his wife and a couple of handlers took him to the edge where the ocean was and looked it up. And he fell flat on his face in the ocean. And as he's recounting the story to me, he says, Sunil, I have one of two things I can do at this moment. The first thing is I can basically bow to my fear and my embarrassment and sit back in that wheelchair. And for the rest of my life, feel regret because I never pursued my dream. Or I can trust my intuition, take this next step forward and the next step forward and the next step forward. And that's what he did. And then what he did is he points to his chin and he says, the water gets up to about here. And then I looked back and he said, I just never realized how far I came when I did that.
Wow. It makes me get a little emotional. That's incredible.
Absolutely.
Wow.
Absolutely. I mean, this is life, right? And so when I have talks or I have these things about relationships or people that are in your life that are caustic, your reaction is what happens, because when I'm talking about people knowing when people should be kicked out of their lives and they don't do anything about it, it comes to them where they say, holy crap. Right? Like there's that person, and I get the exact same reaction, and I say, and I know I've touched a couple of you people, and there's a number of you here that already know what I'm talking about because I can tell by your reaction. And I had one person, I remember there was someone that was coming in the way of their marriage, and her husband were just like, it was just causing so much trouble for them. And she just didn't have the courage or whatever, however you want to describe it. She didn't trust her intuition, even though her intuition was saying that get rid of that person. Right after my talk, she did. And 3 weeks later, I saw her in the hallway somewhere, and she thanked me because her marriage, it just improved in those 3 weeks because they got rid of the caustic of the cancer that was really affecting the stress in their marriage because they trusted. And it's hard, right? I mean, you're emotionally close to someone. You get better at letting people go. And because I'm just sort of in the intuition space all the time, to me, it becomes black or white. But a lot of people, there's lots of shades of gray. And what they need to do is make sure that those shades of gray get darker and darker so that it becomes black or white, and not worry about what other people think. Because who cares, right? Who cares? It's your journey. It's your success. It's your intuition. Who cares? There's got a lot of armchair quarterbacks telling me about entrepreneurship and how stupid things were that I did. Who cares? I've got, and if you want the data now, we can look back. We've got laggard indicators called data. It's called millions in revenues. It's called affecting lives. I didn't think about that when I started the venture. I didn't think about that when I started intuitionology. it was my purpose. It was a driven passion, and it was intuitive signals that led me to do this stuff, just like anybody else. And of course, there were people around me that were looking and saying, "This is dumb. It's great." You can tell their intention was just, "Yeah, okay." The words are different than what your intention is, because I can sense the sarcasm. But who cares, right? And the best thing as a legacy, I guess, is one thing I tell my kids is I can die tomorrow with a smile on my face, because I've done everything to affect people in a positive way. And even for my two daughters, they're 9 and 14. As much as I talk about intuition at home all the time, they roll their eyes saying, "Oh, Dad's going on to intuitionology." For both of them, it's when my daughter was 5 and my other daughter was 9, they moved away from bullying incidents early enough, because their intuition recognized the signs of the behaviors, the values that went against how we raised them. And so without getting into bullying incidents, they were able to move away from the person, and even giving second chances. The second chance proved again that that person's behavior was not becoming of them. And sure enough, they found all these people, being, quite bullies to other people. And if you look behind me, I've got some art going. So my 14-year-old, she actually started an official federal nonprofit agency to raise money for disabilities and illnesses, purely on intuition. And she had an intuitive moment in India. I said she wanted to do something with disabilities and illness because she saw people who didn't have arms paint. And she goes, "These are beautiful." And she's been painting since she was 4. I said, "Well, you know what I say? It's got to be something that comes from you. It's got to be intuitively led, right? Your intuition has to tell you what to do." And 6 months later, it hit her while we're playing video games. "I'm going to do pop-up events. I'm going to raise money. I'm going to do my art, sell money." Boom, boom, boom. We got the federal the corp the next day. We got the URL. The back end was done. My marketing team did the website, and we had first pop-up event, lots of donations. And she raised so far over $20,000 to $30,000 now in a year and a half. And this is someone who was 12, and she's now 14. And the other thing which I love about the humbleness of that, and what we're talking about, who cares? And she has a podcast series. So she's actually, she has her own podcast. She's beating me on some of the downloads. I don't like that. I love it. And she has guests that are turning me down and saying yes to her. I'm cute. Also, but for her, it's the humbleness. So she often says, "Well, okay, a lot of people say I'm proud of you, like you're a 13-year-old girl doing this, but Dad, I'm just trying to help others, right? So who cares if I'm 13, and who cares if I'm a girl, or who cares if I'm 14, or who cares if I raise 20 grand? Like the main thing is that I affect people." And the one moment that she had at the pop-up event was, there was someone who had cerebral palsy, Parkinson's disease. And he came to the event, and his left arm was shaking, right? And he says, "Avni, come here." And so he hadn't painted for about 26, 28 years. Last time was high school. He said, "Come here. This is what the event is doing to me." And his arm's just going. And then he puts the brush to the canvas, and his arm just settles. And he said, "This is what your event is doing for me. Thank you so much." And it just hit her like a ton of bricks. That's purpose. That's purpose driven by intuition. It has nothing to do with money. Nothing. That is the essence of what people should be doing in life. And that's how success happens, when you continue to live life like that. So if my kids are able to live life like that with the basic skills that they have, I can die tomorrow and I'm a happy man. I'm a happy father.
Seriously, talk about cultivating the future generations here. It's incredible.
And we've talked about that on the podcast before, how, when you do the things you love and you help people, if you have the intention of helping people, then the success comes.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And again, this is now where you don't hang your hat on laggard indicators. This is where you do things in the moment, right? You trust your intuition and take the next step and the next step and the next step. And that's how you reach those goals that you want to reach, and that's how it's done, according to me.
Sounds good to me.
Yeah. Now, I want to look at something from another perspective.
Sure.
So what happens when someone keeps following their intuition, but it actually doesn't turn out great for whatever reason? So like, what is that disconnect that's happening? And then how do they fix that or solve that?
Right. So if I'm ever confronted with that with a client, so first of all, I got to find out, what does not great mean? So does not great mean that their life has turned into shambles? And if so, I backtrack to say, okay, when was it that you made that first decision? And was that really based on intuition, or was that based on one of the intuitive hurdles hitting you? And so we talked about being too emotional. We've talked about fear. There's the other two are called ego and being too rational. So being too rational, following societal rules, I felt into that with engineering. And the fourth intuitive hurdle is called ego. And there's two sides to ego. One is your egotistical self, and the other one is following the herd. So having people around you because they've got a nice name, or they have wear a certain brand, or they've got values that go against you, which your intuition is saying you should move away from, but you don't. So what I look at is, if your life is not doing so well, did you actually make a decision based on one of those four intuitive hurdles hitting you, or was there something when you were younger that you need to work on because it's emotionally, it's got handcuffs on you when you were younger? And in my intensive, that's what we look at, is that it's okay to have memories, but if your emotions are stuck in the past, we have to make those unstuck so that you can move on, because you're stuck back there. So it all depends upon what they define by not so great. The other thing is, what does not so great mean? What's your goal stick? Is your goal stick because of a Lamborghini? Is your goal stick more square footage? What does not great mean? And what I often find is that not great, they're comparing it to others in a very extrinsic way. Whereas, not being, life should be nothing about that. Now, if you think that that's a symbol of success, that's okay, as long as that's exactly what it is because that's your symbol of success. But if you're using it as you want others to see that as a symbol of success, and you'll know that. Everyone knows that distinction, whether they want to say it or not. Their intuition says you're buying that brand name because you want to have others filter you in some kind of way. You want to have that biggest house because you want to keep up with the Joneses. That's not the right way to do things. So this is where you really have to take a look at, what does not necessarily great mean? And so if you want to improve your life, so let's start with the present moment. So what does improving your life mean? And really define that from an intuitive perspective. And what does it really mean to have that? Then you trust your intuition, because it'll give you the path to reach those successes. And that's where you go. So there's a lot of definitions that I need to figure out what they mean by it. There's a lot of watching their body language, listening to what they're saying, paying attention to what's not being said, reading between the lines. And that's my intuition picking up on them. And so there were the four types of intuition that I talked about. We talked about experiential intuition. We also talked about creative intuition, which was the creative decision. The other two types are, one is called situational intuition, where you go into a room and you know that something's out of place. You just get that. So that's called situational. And the fourth one, which is what I use when I talk to clients, is called relational intuition. This is where you're looking at the body language. I'm looking at how you're reacting, the pauses, are the actions matching your words, and I can quickly tell if what you're saying or you're trying to say is not what I know you're trying to say. And that's where we dive a little bit deeper into, okay, what's actually really going on? And then it's up to you as a client to really trust me to make sure that I can only guide you. If you're going to try and sell me a story, that's not going to work because you're telling yourself a story. And if you're telling yourself a story, you're going against your intuition, then no wonder your life is not so good, because you've got somebody else's story in your head. You should be living your own story. And that's what I get them to do. And it's, for some, it's hard work. It's really hard work because they have to really confront themselves and be okay with it. And this is not about, opening Pandora's box or, blaming them or pointing a finger. I'm just saying it's your intuition that's already telling you what to do. I'm just going to help you see that light that's a bit brighter. And so this is where it really I really have to find out what they mean. And it's using that sort of relational intuition to do that.
One of the things that I wanted to make sure to tell our listeners is to make sure that you watch Sunil's TED Talk, because it is fantastic.
Thank you.
One of the main things that really stood out to me is when you referenced Dr. Martin Luther King's speech and how he went off script and said, I have a dream. I didn't know that.
Yes.
So like you're saying, he followed his intuition to just say really what he meant in the moment. And look, he changed history. I mean, everyone knows that. Everyone knows that quote.
Absolutely.
So, Yeah, pretty powerful. So I highly encourage all of you to go check that out.
Thank you.
And we will have links to all of Sunil's just incredible, incredible offers here with Intuitionology. And special for our listeners, he's also offering 20% off his membership levels for you guys. So
absolutely, make
sure you take him up on that offer. Sunil, it was such a joy to have you on the show. You made me all emotional.
Well, I know, and I thank you for sharing that, because I'm getting to you, right? That's intuition, is that root level, right? And that I appreciate you letting me know that, because that's what we should be doing. Yeah. It's getting to that base level, because now that's the intuitive level, right? There's nothing on top of that that's covering that up. So I appreciate you letting me know that.
Oh, appreciate you. Oh my goodness.
Such a pleasure having you on here.
Absolutely. Thank you. Appreciate it.
Yeah, definitely. Everyone go check out Sunil's book and 7-day challenge. We'll have links. Take him up on his offer for 20% off. We'll talk with everyone soon.
Bye.
In the next episode, we answer the question, what the heck is an NFT? Non-fungible token. We share how they are related to cryptocurrency, how people are making money with them, both creating them and investing in them, and how you can get started if you want as well. This whole episode came about because Mark Cuban said if he had to start a new business from scratch with nothing, this is what he would focus on, and we said, why not do an episode about it? And why not leave us a review on Apple Podcasts? You know you want to. Yeah, you do.